Let's dive into something that I think
Mm.
is super relevant for anyone leading a team or, making those tough decisions.
Mm.
And it all comes down to how we regulate our emotions. We're taking a deep dive into a research paper today that suggests that all those tiny in-the-moment choices we make about our feelings
Yeah,
might be more important than we realize.
that's right. Those tiny choices we make.
Yeah.
I think we're looking at a paper by Derek M. Isaacowicz and Anna E. Wolf.
hmm
They're psychology researchers who
Well,
argue that these small choices are called emotion regulation tactics. And they can be more insightful than just looking at broad strategies when it comes to understanding how we deal with our emotions.
gotcha. So not just like the big picture, I'm
Yeah.
going to try and stay calm approach, but the micro choices we make throughout the day.
Yeah, like in the moment.
What got these researchers interested in these tiny tactics in the first place?
Well, they started with an interesting observation. Older adults often report greater emotional well-being,
Okay.
even as they face challenges that come with aging. It's a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
Researchers had looked at broader emotion regulation strategies, like choosing to avoid a situation or trying to reframe your thinking to
that's right.
explain this.
Yeah.
But those strategies didn't show strong differences between age groups.
So maybe the secret sauce isn't in those big strategies, but how they're put into action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These researchers propose that it's the specific tactics we use, the
Yeah.
tiny ways we implement those strategies. That might be the key.
Can you give us an example
Yeah.
of what you mean by a tactic?
Absolutely. Imagine you're looking at a photo with a negative scene, maybe like a stressful work environment. A tactic could be choosing to focus on a small detail in the background, like a plant on someone's desk. You're still in the same situation, but you've shifted your attention. It's a specific choice that can influence how you feel in that moment.
I can see how that tiny shift could make a difference. So how do the researchers organize all these different potential tactics? It seems like there could be tons of them.
There are tons of them, but they've broken them down in a really clever way using two key dimensions, valence and direction.
Valence and direction, it sounds a bit like a compass for our emotions.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
Valence refers to whether the element you're focusing on is positive or negative, and direction indicates whether you're approaching or moving away from that element.
So if you're feeling stressed about a presentation, you start thinking about all the ways it could go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
That would be negative valence and approaching, right?
Got it. And if you decided to take a walk to clear your head before the presentation, that would be moving away from the negativity.
So you're not necessarily trying to focus on something positive in that moment.
Right.
You're just stepping away from the stress.
Exactly. It's about strategically disengaging from the negative.
This is really making me think about all those little choices we make all the time without even realizing it.
It's fascinating how those tiny, almost subconscious choices can really add up, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And, this research got me thinking about something we briefly touched on earlier.
Okay.
Those age-related differences in well-being and tactic use.
You mentioned that older adults seem to gravitate
Right.
towards focusing on the positive or moving away from negativity.
Exactly.
Is there something about these tactics that makes them inherently more effective for regulating emotions?
That's a great question. While there's still a lot to unpack, there's some evidence suggesting that certain tactics, particularly those focused on approaching the positive, might be linked to better moods regardless of age.
So it's not just that older adults have figured out some emotional life hack. It's that these specific tactics might have benefits for anyone.
It seems that way. One study looked at how people's moods changed after using different tactics and found that those who used positive approaching tactics tended to report feeling better afterwards, regardless of their age.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's worth noting that those who simply moved away from negative emotions didn't consistently see the same mood boost.
So even though disengaging from negativity can be helpful in certain situations, it might not be the most effective way to actually lift your spirits.
Exactly. It highlights the nuance of this whole concept, and it has some pretty significant implications, especially when you think about how we can use this knowledge to help people improve their emotion regulation skills.
You mean like designing interventions or programs?
Exactly. How would knowing about these tactics change things?
Yeah, how would it?
Well, traditionally, interventions have focused on teaching people broader strategies, like reframing their thinking or using mindfulness techniques. But what if we shifted the focus to specifically training people in these positive approaching tactics?
So instead of just saying, try to think about this situation differently, you'd give people specific tools for finding and focusing on the positive.
Precisely. Imagine if we could equip people with the skills to intentionally savor positive experiences, find the silver linings in difficult situations, or actively cultivate gratitude. We could potentially help them build a stronger foundation for emotional well-being.
I love that idea. So we've talked about valence and direction, the potential age differences, and how this research could change the way we approach emotional regulation training. Are there any other important dimensions or categories of tactics that the researchers explore?
Absolutely. Valence and direction are key.
Okay. But it's a vast and complex landscape. Researchers are also looking at things like whether tactics are internal or external.
Internal versus external. What's the difference?
Internal tactics focus on regulating your emotions by changing your thoughts or feelings, while external tactics involve changing or interacting with your external environment.
Okay, that makes sense. So an internal tactic could be something like positive self-talk.
Right.
Trying to shift your mindset.
Exactly.
Whereas an external tactic might be something like calling a friend for support or going for a walk to clear your head.
You've got it. And these different dimensions can work together. For example, you can have a positive approaching tactic that's internal, like savoring a happy memory.
Yeah.
Or external, like seeking out a beautiful view.
It's like there's a whole matrix of different tactics we can use.
There is.
And the more we understand these tactics and how they work, the more we can refine our approaches to emotional regulation, whether it's for personal growth, leadership development, or even building more emotionally intelligent workplaces.
This research is really making me rethink how I approach those everyday emotional challenges.
Me too.
Okay, so we've delved into the nuances of these tactics, the age-related findings, and the exciting possibilities for interventions. But I'm curious, what does this all mean for the average person? How can we take these insights from the research lab and apply them to our daily lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we actually take this fascinating research and make it work for us in the real world? Where do we even begin?
You know, sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. Start by paying attention. We've talked about awareness throughout this deep dive. It really is the foundation.
Notice those moments when you're feeling stressed or frustrated or even joyful, and try to identify what you're naturally drawn to do.
So becoming a bit of an emotion detective, observing our own reaction instead of just going with the flow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Are you someone who tends to dive right into problem-solving mode? Or do you prefer to step back and take a breather? Once you have a better understanding of your go-to tactics, you can start to experiment with different approaches.
Especially those positive approaching tactics we've been talking about.
Right.
Okay.
Think of it like expanding your emotional toolkit. And here's where things get really interesting. Once you start recognizing these tactics in yourself, you start to see them in others too.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So it's not just about personal growth,
Right.
but also understanding the people around us better.
Absolutely. Imagine if we could all recognize when someone is spiraling into negativity and gently guide them towards a more positive outlook. Or how much stronger our relationships could be if we understood how the people we care about naturally manage their emotions.
It's almost like this research gives us a secret decoder ring
I love that.
for human emotion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it goes beyond our personal lives, too. Think about how this knowledge could transform the way we approach leadership and create more emotionally intelligent workplaces.
You've definitely piqued my curiosity. How can we apply this in a workplace setting?
Picture this, a workplace where leaders are trained to recognize these tactics in their team members. They could intentionally design meetings and projects to support those who thrive on positive approaches, offer resources for those who tend to withdraw when stressed, and create a culture that values emotional intelligence.
It would be amazing to work somewhere that focused not just on what you produce, but on how you feel while you're doing it.
Yeah, totally. And there's a real business case for this, too. Research shows that positive emotions are linked to greater creativity, better problem solving, and even increased productivity.
So happier employees equal a more successful company.
That's the idea.
I'm starting to see how all of this connects.
Yeah.
This entire conversation has been so insightful. It feels like we've gone on a real journey from understanding these tiny tactics to seeing how they can impact everything from our personal lives to our workplaces.
It's been quite a journey indeed. And for me, the biggest takeaway is that this research reminds us that we're not powerless when it comes to our emotions. We have choices, we have tools,
Yeah.
and we can actively cultivate greater well-being for ourselves and the people around us.
That's such an empowering message.
I think so.
So for our listeners who are ready to put all of this into practice, what are some key things to keep in mind?
First and foremost, be kind to yourself. Don't get caught up in judging your emotional reaction. Instead, approach them with curiosity and a willingness to learn. Second, don't be afraid to experiment. Try different tactics and see what works best for you in different situations.
Yeah.
And finally, remember that small changes can make a big difference. You don't have to overhaul your entire emotional repertoire overnight. Start by incorporating 1 or 2 new tactics into your daily life and see how it feels.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. Remember, you have the power to shape your emotional landscape and create a more positive and fulfilling life. Go out there and start experimenting. We'd love to hear about your experiences.
Until next time, keep diving deep.